privileged to introduce to you the first speaker this morning. It is Dr. Douglas Lee-OLoughlin. It's a privilege for me to introduce him. He's a friend and mentor of mine, and I call him the Asian Angmo, right? Angmo on the outside, Asian on the inside, and he's going to share with us this thing about same or not, and it's a very fascinating topic. I benefited and learned a lot from him just by interactions. I will not go into the detail of the conversation because he's going to share with you, and if you get to know him, he's someone who I would say gives from the heart and gives in abundance. So do take this opportunity to listen to him, engage him, and hear him share. And at the end of the session, please give us your feedback. So once again, can I introduce to you Dr. Douglas Lee-OLoughlin? Can we put our hands together for him? Right? And please take away.
Oh, hi, thanks, Isaac, for that lovely introduction. And it has been great to get to know each other over the last couple of years. And I think what's really exciting about this event, many reasons, but I guess one would be that anytime you get a bunch of OD people or just people that really want to make their organization or society or community healthier and more effective, that's a good thing, right? So we all have a very wonderful common purpose, and exciting to see what's happening there, getting some energy for ODN community in Malaysia. We started it a few years ago in Singapore. And just in case you're not aware, there's communities in Japan, India, Thailand, Philippines, and there's also an Asia OD network, which is a bit loose. So there's a lot of really good things happening in Australia. So all around the region, of course, and then there's the global ones. So, and this is a nice one because Isaac has been part of the Singapore group for a couple of years. Joseph did a wonderful presentation a week or two ago for our network, and I'm here to share with you. So we're building a larger community. And at the end, my last slide, I'll send you, there was a link that you can look at a lot of the resources that we have, including if you want to join our Telegram group, our Facebook group, and like that. So we're all going to help each other so we can help our organizations and societies. All right, so yeah, nice to be connected. So yeah, same but different, practicing OD in Southeast Asia. Well, Isaac sort of alluded to this. I've been actually started coming to this part of the world. I grew up in New York in 1989. I was with AT&T. I've been living here almost there since then. I just came by accident, still here. Wonderful to be in this part of the world. So yeah, so most of my OD experience is, in these last 30 years, all around the region. So yeah, I've noticed some difference about same, but different, and we're going to explore those. So here we go. So we're again same but different. If you sure you know that slogan. So we're going to look at that, at what OD looks like differently, especially in Southeast Asia. And like I said, been working. I was with AT&T, and then for many years a freelance consultant, so working around the region and around the world, and then for the last 9 years with Civil Service College, because there was a vision to build up that every ministry and agency had OD practitioners that could serve their own agency rather than calling, getting an external consultant. So build up our own capability. But that's been a very exciting journey. And then the OD Network Singapore, or Malaysia, all the countries, is then a wider community than that. So our plan, we just did a little sensing that didn't work as well as we hoped, but get some data. Then we're going to a quick look at the field of OD, especially for those of you who are not familiar with the field so much. And then we're going to look at what's same about OD around the world, and a quick look at what's different about OD in this part of the world. And then we open up whatever time we have to engage in a dialogue or answer some of your questions. So I just want to make a point that people have been doing this kind of thing for thousands of years. I put a link into a video of a good friend, John Shear, who's been one of kind of the pioneers of OD. And he made this nice little, fun little video about how that's been true. So you can watch the video, but if I give you a 30-second overview, he's thinking that maybe the first OD consultant was some guy named Karg, and they went out, to hunting back in the day, and one or two people got killed, and then he sat down, he pulled everyone together at the end of the day and said, "Hey, what happened out there? What did we learn? What can we do better next time?" And he said that was the first act of what we might call a OD consultant of some type. Then the other one he talks about is in Egypt, that with the Nile used to flood, so they used to have to work, a mix of the people and the technology of dams, and make sure that everyone got enough water for their farm. So it took a lot of collaboration for all the farmers and all the people along the whole Nile to make sure that some didn't get too much water or too little water. So that's the second one. The third one he talks about was Jethro. Moses was taking his people through the desert. He went to talk to his father-in-law, Jethro, and said, "I'm really stressed. I got like thousands of people all coming to me." And the father-in-law, being a very wise father-in-law, said, "Maybe you could create a structure." So he said that's the first time we ever had an org chart out in the desert. I don't know if they drew it or not. And then the last one that relates to what we do is a court jester. So like for us, it really helps to work on our issues with power, because often we deal with people with a lot more power and authority than we have in the hierarchy. But we are driven by the mission that really care about the organization. So sometimes we have to have conversations, point things out to senior leaders that a little bit uncomfortable, but we do it in a way that they can hear it, and where we can build on the relationship and be a trusted advisor. So those are things that, again, thousands of years, the idea of making systems better is not new. What is a little bit new, the field kind of really formally came about because of what was happening in the 1930s when Hitler came into power, and a lot of Jewish psychologists they fled to the U.S. because their kids couldn't go to school and it was getting quite dangerous. Some of them were getting taken away. And that group of people in the U.S. started to ask the question, like, how could this be? How could what seemed like nice people just turn like that and kill people and do all kinds of terrible things? So then they got together with lots of people and did started to really do research on this is behavioral science, right? Individual, group, and system behavior. And when they were consulting first with an organization, somebody asked them, what do you call what it is, the kind of work you do? And they almost called it bottoms-up management because it was unusual, right, to get the frontliners to share their ideas. So they almost called it that. But, I don't think that title would have been very helpful. It would have been like, a drinking thing or bottoms up or, a very odd title, right? So luckily they didn't do that. They called it organization development. And it's slightly more complicated than this, but I think just to say that Kurt Lewin, one of those psychologists that fled Germany in those days, is probably the one most responsible for the field. And it all happened very fortuitously, but he ended up teaching at MIT. So they had an academic arm and a lot of good OD work, learning organizations. A lot of the system thinking work has come out of MIT and really started back in those days. And then they started a laboratory where they could practice and do research and come up with new ideas. And that was NTL Institute. So that's, I think it's great that our field is grounded both in academic work as well as in research, and a lot of work in diversity and all kinds of things that came out of that. And I'm not going to read down that list on the right, but you can see that a lot of really meaningful and work that's very relevant, mainstream work that's come out of that early days of OD. So, and that's kind of our thing, right? If we create really good work, it becomes mainstream, and our job is not to be a consultant for the rest of our life. We would love if our organizations would practice all of that. So we'll be sending you the slide so you can take a look at some of that list later, but yeah, it's a nice slide to be able to give credit to the pioneers of the field. So quick definitions. Ed Schein, one of the pioneers, it's all about maintaining the health of the whole system. Another one is about, it's a values-based practice to help organizations, communities to a better state. I think if I just put that very simply, or the most simple one would be on the left, which is we want to help the organization enhance how it has impact externally, and then internally we want to have good health, right? So effectiveness and health. And here's a diagram I'm sure you would have seen before. I think my experience, I'm not sure about yours, but my experience is that if people work in a particular function, whether it's finance, whether it's a particular business line, they don't always see the whole elephant, so to speak. They don't always see the whole picture. So that's what we mean by helping. You don't always have to work with the entire system all the time, but we are helping people to see pieces of the system, parts of the system or the elephant that they are not aware of. And that's a lot of the work we do. There's a term called system blindness and system sight from the work of one of the other pioneers, Barry Oshry. So how do we help create more system sight in the organization? Because nobody else is doing that. Very few. There's top leaders, of course, your CEO or your PermSec or whatever, that top one or two people, they look at the system. But for most people, they're looking at their own domain. So our job is to help create system sight. So again, a wonderful, meaningful role that we play. And this is HR, even strat planning, OD. I don't want to get caught up on the titles, organizational excellence, but you know what we're talking about here. Let's not squabble over the menu. Let's talk about the food. So how do we do OD? This is, to me, the one, if there's one thing, if you're not so familiar with the field, this is one 7-step process that is, to me, the foundation, not just me, I think most practitioners in the world. We can also send a nice article on this. And actually, it's not a 7-step process as much as it looks like. That's why it's a dynamic process. But any project that you do, whether you're internal or external, you do some, you meet the person or the people that want to do something to shift their system to be healthier or more impactful. Then we go get some data, we give the data back to the system. Then we plan, okay, what are we going to do? What kind of intervention is it? So we plan that, we get people involved, we do the intervention, and we evaluate. However, it's not that linear because when you go in and you do entry and you start talking to people, even in that first conversation, you're also getting data. So you're doing diagnostics, even though you're just having an initial conversation. And if you ask really insightful or challenging questions in that first meeting, you're also intervening. And you don't wait till the end of a project. This is one of the big issues that people say, how do you evaluate an OD work? It is challenging, but it becomes almost impossible if you wait till the whole process is over and say, okay, well, how are we going to tell if it worked? So that needs to be done in the contracting stage. So evaluation always starts in the contracting stage when we ask the department or whoever we're working with, how will how should we measure success of this? And then you have that conversation up front. So it looks quite simple, but again, a bit more dynamic. And we'll send you an article on that just so you can dig into this, especially if you're not familiar with it. All right, so that's kind of an overview of the field. Let me talk about same, but different. All right, so and look at some of the sames and some of the difference. I lived in Thailand and taught in the Masters of OD in Assumption University for a couple of years, and still connected to them. I have a very good OD program, Masters and PhD. So obviously saw these shirts a lot. So really quick, here's 6 things that are, I think, same all around the world of OD. We are trying to help a system be more healthy, right? Thrive, not just survive. We use behavioral science. We understand, we do our best to understand how people act, why they act the way they are. Teams, a lot on group dynamics, system dynamics. So we're looking at behavioral science. We're not just making stuff up. We do it in collaboration with the client. If you know a typical management consultant, they're doing it to the client, or, you know, here's my recommendations. Whereas when we do process consulting, it's more, we're working with the client, because we want to leave the client with better understanding of what to do and how to do it and why we do what we do. And it leaves the system in a better place. We always get data before we intervene. That's a golden rule. Whenever we can, we use a participatory approach when it makes sense. So I guess this is more for the experienced folks in OD, but I should see if this resonates with you. So when people ask me, you know, whether we should get, you know, more people involved, I say, okay, so here's what you're trying to do. Can you do that? Can you make this announcement, send it everyone out, do a Q&A, and will they implement the plan? You know, it's a change of some sort, a new system, a restructure. And if people will do it, then I say, go right ahead. You don't need to get participation if you think everyone is on board with this. But if they say no, then we can explore, okay, who else in the system can we get involved to help design what's going to happen? So participatory approach when it makes sense. And the last one is, I think in most helping professions, I think psychologists, OD consultants and others, this idea that who we are is an instrument in itself to serve the system. So really, if we develop, and that's one of the things I think is another lovely thing about our profession, is that we work on ourselves, we work on our blind spots, we learn to be more, you know, more accepting, less judgmental, get more comfortable with power, more skillful in how we give sometimes what might be difficult, feedback, be okay with conflict, all those things. We improve in ourselves so that we can be more effective as consultants. So and I think that's a wonderful bonus that comes along the way of doing this kind of work, of making things better. So that's the same thing. Now, there's a bunch of studies. I pulled one out, the Globe study, one of the biggest studies around the world about leadership. And you can look at the slides later to look at more detail. But in our part of the world, you can see the 2 circles. So there's a Southeast Asian influence. There's a bit of Confucian influence, and more in the Chinese culture. And that's why Singapore is in there, a bit more Chinese. So because of that, how we do OD here is different than in other parts of the world. So 3 things that I think are pointed out here. So one is higher power distance. I think you all know what I'm talking about here. I often joke that where I grew up in the US, if you have a meeting, it's the loudest voice wins, you know. But in this part of the world, it's the highest level person in the room sort of wins in that sense. So hierarchy and power, there's a much higher power distance in our part of the world. The second one is that there's much higher levels of collectivism. So I'm sure you watch the news and you see that in US, there's many people saying, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask. I want freedom of choice, right? So we don't see that much in this part of the world because people think more naturally, right, about the whole, right? So we're more responsible for the whole. And then the third one is people and in our part of the world, a little less expressive and assertive than, say, in other cultures in the world, especially, Northern Europe, US, and some of the others. So those are three things that are quite different about this part of the world. So then the question is, what does that mean for our practice? So I'll give you my ideas from my experience. So the first one is during that entry and contracting, when you first meet with a director, department head, managing director, whoever, when you're doing that early contracting, you have to connect with the top person. I think, and even in MNCs that have become more westernized, it's not as important. I still insist on it, but if you talk to, say, the HR director and then HR, sure, I'll take care of the people at the top, make sure they understand everything. It's more likely to happen. But what I've seen is if you're going to do an intervention and the top person is going to be in the session or in the room or in the series of sessions, whatever you're doing, it is so critical to have the top person, to have talked to that person, him or her, and make sure they're clear on what's happening. Because otherwise, they could just come in and something happens that they're not familiar with, and then they just pull the rug out from underneath the project. So I think in this part of the world, it's just so important. And I won't bore you with stories. I have many stories about what could go wrong when the top person gets surprised in front of the whole team. So that's hierarchy. The second one related to that, to the hierarchy piece. In the US, I learned from Peter Block, the Flawless Consulting, again, one of the pioneers. And when you contract with the top person, and then they say, fixed by people, right, is a typical thing that most leaders around the world do. So he taught us, to say, okay, when they say fix my people, and then we would ask, or I would ask, so are you open to the fact that you are also part of the problem? And that actually works. People are okay with that, because it's, more open and we can discuss it. But as you can imagine, that doesn't work very well in this part of the world because it's very confrontational and like that. So the question that I've learned to ask when I meet with a senior leader who says, fix my people, the first question is it okay if I get some data and talk to people, find out how they're doing? And then they say yes. And then I say, hey, as we're collecting data, would it be okay if we got some data on you? Being at the top, sometimes you don't get data. Would you like, do you have any specific questions that you would like myself or us to ask people about you as their leader? And 90-something% of the time, people say, yeah, I would love to get more feedback. Can you ask about this or that? So how we ask permission from leaders is very different in this part of the world than that more confrontational. So are you willing to look at yourself as part of the problem? The third one, and this one I'm open if you have a different way of looking at it, but I really do my best. I'm always a little leery of focus groups because I find that unless you get people who are really all aligned, I think they're okay to talk to us, but I'm not sure they're willing to share everything in front of peers, in front of their colleagues. So I really try to get feedback as interviews one-on-one. I'm amazed at what people share one-on-one once they trust us and once they know it's a safe space, or to get anonymous feedback. So that works. I think it works. It makes it easier for people to speak one-on-one than a group. I'm not saying never use a focus group, but my experience is interviews always get more, the data is always richer. And then the last two, having a change team or design team when you're going through a major change or restructuring or merger or whatever. And also this idea of getting the system in the room, the large group intervention with a couple of hundred people, the whole system in the room. Those two are also helpful in the more, Western culture, but I think they're even more effective in Asian culture. I'll speak to the last one. I've done so many large group interventions where the sponsor will say, I don't think people are going to open up because some of them are competing each other. They compete for funding. They compete for beneficiaries. They compete for all kinds of things. I don't think people open up. But when you get people, and that happens in the West, I've seen it. I've done it in the West too. And you get a lot of, kind of stakeholder disagreements, and people are trying to get their targets met. In Asia, what I've seen so many times is those people, even with very different, they're really competing, when they come together in the room and they see a common purpose, like help the elderly or better customer focus or more collaboration or help with early childhood education, whatever the issue is, people get right into what's for the common good. And they share in ways that the sponsor, the person who originally sponsored this, is just so pleasantly surprised. So I think that level of collectivism really comes into play when we're doing something for the common good. So those are, to me, a few of the practices that look different in this part of the world than in the West. At least that's my experience and 2 cents. I hope some of this is useful. We're going to send you some follow-up. So I'll just go to the last piece, which is, I think it's your feedback, but also, and maybe more importantly, your questions. Let me see how much time there is for questions. Yeah, we still have some time for questions, so I hope some of them are coming in. And just to point out, at the bottom of the slide, there's a Google site that one of our team members in the OD Network Singapore set up that has all kinds of resources. There's articles you can download, there's books you can refer to, we have a video library of amazing short, 5-10 minute videos from thought leaders that you can look at on a Vimeo site. If you want, you can join different communities, like I mentioned earlier, our Telegram group, our Facebook group. So there's lots of resources there that you can plug into, and we just love the idea of expanding the community.